The photo came through at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, staring at the ceiling fan in my bedroom, running numbers in my head the way I'd been doing every night for the past 3 weeks. The retirement account, the pension, the equity in the house. 63 years old and doing arithmetic in the dark like a nervous college kid before an exam. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I assumed it was spam. I almost didn't look. It was my grandson, 14 years old. And the message he sent had no words at all, just a photograph. I sat up. I turned on the lamp. I looked at that photo for a long time. My wife Lorraine passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that doesn't give you much warning and doesn't give you much time. We had 31 years together. We raised 2 kids in a colonial on Birchwood Court in Dayton, Ohio. We argued about the thermostat and whose turn it was to call the plumber and whether our son should have been pushed harder in school. We took a trip to Portugal for our 25th anniversary that we still talked about on our last anniversary, our 30th, which we spent at home because she was already too tired to go far. After she died, I didn't know what to do with myself. That's the honest truth. I'd always been a practical man. 32 years as an electrical engineer. A man who fixed things, who solved problems, who made lists. Grief doesn't have a list. There's no schematic for it. I rattled around that house for 2 years doing not much of anything, and my daughter Meg started calling every Sunday and my son Paul started coming over for dinner more often than he used to, and I understood what they were doing and I loved them for it, but I also knew they couldn't fill what was missing. My neighbor's wife introduced me to Vivian at a backyard cookout in June of last year. Vivian was 58, recently relocated from Atlanta, said she'd left a long career in nonprofit fundraising to be closer to family in the area. She had dark hair with silver at the temples that she didn't try to hide. She laughed at my jokes, which Lorraine always said was the surest sign a woman had good character. We talked for 3 hours at that cookout while everyone else drifted inside. I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly. More like the possibility of it. We started seeing each other in July, dinners at first, then weekend drives out to the lake, then she was coming over to watch old movies on Friday nights and I was cooking for 2 again for the first time in years. It felt careful and slow and right. My daughter Meg met her once over coffee and said she seemed warm. My son Paul was quieter about it, but he wasn't hostile. By October, Vivian and I had started talking seriously about the future. She had been renting her condo across town, she said, but her lease was ending in the spring. We were both at ages where it made sense to stop being cautious, she said, to stop waiting for permission from ourselves. She talked about consolidating, about her selling some assets she had tied up in Atlanta, me potentially liquidating the retirement account, buying something together, a fresh start, something that was ours. She said the word ours, the way people mean it when they want you to feel chosen. I felt chosen. By November, I had spoken with my financial advisor twice about early withdrawal penalties. By December, I had signed a preliminary agreement with a real estate agent about listing the house on Birchwood Court, the house where my kids grew up, the house where Lorraine and I spent 31 years. I told myself it was just practical. I told myself Lorraine would have wanted me to live. On December 14th, I drove to the realtor's office and signed the listing paperwork. That night at 11:37, my grandson sent me a photograph. His name is Oliver. My son Paul's boy. He's 14 and quiet in the way his father was quiet at that age, observant, more careful with words than most adults I know. He doesn't say much, but when he does, it tends to matter. He'd been at the house for Thanksgiving. Vivienne had come too, at my invitation. And it was the first holiday I'd hosted since Lorraine died. I'd made the same dishes Lorraine always made. The green bean casserole, the stuffing with the sage sausage, the cranberry relish from a recipe card written in her handwriting that I kept in the kitchen drawer. I wanted it to feel like continuity rather than replacement. Oliver sat across from Vivian at dinner and barely spoke. I noticed it, but I didn't read into it. He was a teenager. Teenagers withdraw. I remember being one. 3 weeks later, he sent me the photograph. It was a screenshot, a Facebook profile page. The name on the profile was Vivian Hartwell, my Vivienne. But the face in the profile photo was different. It was the same woman, unmistakably, but 20 pounds heavier, hair shorter, standing in front of what looked like a beachfront property somewhere warm. The bio said she lived in Sarasota, Florida. It listed her as married. Below the screenshot, Oliver had typed 5 words. "Grandpa, is this the same person?" I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in both hands the way you hold something fragile. My first thought, and I am not proud of this, was that he was wrong. That there was a resemblance, but it wasn't her. That Facebook profiles have errors, photos get misattributed. There are people in the world who look alike. I'm a man who spent 3 decades solving engineering problems by finding logical explanations, and my brain went looking for one immediately. I typed back, "Where did you find this?" He responded within seconds, which told me he'd been awake waiting for my reply. Trying to look up her charity work for a school project on nonprofits. "Grandpa, I don't think she does charity work." I asked him what he meant. He sent 3 more screenshots. The first was a LinkedIn profile under a different name, Vivienne Cross, listing her as a private wealth consultant based in Sarasota. The second was a snippet from what appeared to be a public court record from Hillsborough County, Florida, from 2019, a civil case, a judgment. The third was an archived local news article from a Tampa Bay area outlet dated 2020. The headline used the name Vivienne Cross. The article was about a fraud investigation involving a retired couple who had lost their savings in a real estate investment scheme. The woman in the photo accompanying the article was my Vivienne. I set the phone down on the nightstand. I picked it up again. I read everything twice. I don't know how long I sat there. The ceiling fan turned overhead the same as it always did. The house was completely quiet. Outside, a car passed on the street, and its headlights swept across the ceiling and disappeared. I typed to Oliver, "Can you come over tomorrow? Don't tell your father yet. I need to see everything you found." He replied, "I'll be there at 9. I have more. I didn't sleep. I watched the clock go from 1 to 2 to 3, and then I stopped watching. At some point, I got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the dark. Lorraine used to say I thought better in the dark, which she meant as mild criticism, but which was probably true. I thought about the past 6 months. I went back through every conversation with Vivienne the way you reread a contract looking for the clause you missed, the way she had appeared at that cookout, introduced by a neighbor's wife, newcomer to the area, no deep roots locally, no one who knew her before she arrived, the way she had moved quickly without seeming to. Each step felt natural in the moment. Looking back, there was a pace to it, a schedule almost. The way she brought up money, always in terms of our future, always wrapped in warmth and optimism, always framed as romantic rather than transactional. Let's build something together. We're not getting younger. Think about what we could do. The way I had never met a single person from her previous life. Not a friend, not a sibling, not a colleague from her years in nonprofit work. She always had reasons. People were busy. Atlanta was far. She'd grown apart from most of them after her own loss. She'd told me she was a widow too, which I now turned over very carefully in my mind. I sat at that table until the sky outside the window went from black to gray. Oliver arrived at 9 with a folder. An actual paper folder, the kind with the 2 prongs inside, the kind I hadn't seen since my kids were in school. He printed everything out. He's 14. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and opened the folder with the seriousness of someone much older, and for a moment I had to look away, because he reminded me so sharply of Paul at that age that it caught me off guard. "Grandpa," he said, "I started looking because I wanted to do my project on a real nonprofit. I searched her name and the name of the charity she mentioned at Thanksgiving, and I couldn't find anything. So I looked harder." He laid the pages out in order. The Facebook profile, the LinkedIn, the court record, the news article, then 4 more pages I hadn't seen yet. Printed forum posts from a website dedicated to romance fraud awareness. 3 separate posts from 3 separate people, posted between 2017 and 2022, describing encounters with a woman who used different names but whose methods were described in nearly identical language. She targeted widowers. She presented herself as a recent transplant. She moved quickly toward financial consolidation. She disappeared before legal exposure, usually just before or just after the first major transfer of money. One of the forum posts included a photograph. Different name, different city. Same face. I didn't want to be wrong, Oliver said. He was looking at his hands. I kept waiting because I thought maybe I was seeing something that wasn't there. At Meg. She always says I see problems where there aren't any. You weren't wrong, I said. I know. He looked up at me. I was scared you'd be angry. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. He's 14, still young enough that this didn't embarrass him. You did the right thing, I told him. You did exactly the right thing. I called my financial advisor at 10 that morning and told him to halt everything. He asked no questions. He knew my situation well enough to hear the tone in my voice. I told him I would explain later. He said he understood and halted everything. I called the real estate agent next. The listing had been active for 12 days. There had been interest. One couple had toured the house. Another had requested a second visit. I told the agent I needed to pull the listing. She was professional about it. Asked if everything was all right. I said it wasn't, and that I'd be in touch. Then I sat for a while longer. I had to call Vivienne. I had been dreading it since 9 in the morning, but I knew it had to be me. I wasn't going to send a text. I wasn't going to have someone do it for me. 63 years old, and I had some things left to settle myself. I called her at noon. She answered on the second ring, the same warm voice I'd been hearing for 6 months. She asked how my morning had been. She mentioned something about looking at paint colors for the hypothetical kitchen of the hypothetical house we'd been hypothetically planning together. I said, I know about Hillsborough County. Silence. Not long silence. Maybe 4 seconds. But a different kind of silence than I'd ever heard from her before. Behind it, I could hear something reorganizing. I could hear her deciding. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Her voice had changed register slightly. Not much, but enough. I think you do, I said. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I think we both know this conversation is over. She said my name once. I didn't respond. I ended the call. I set the phone on the table and looked at it for a moment. Then I looked around the kitchen. The same cabinets Lorraine had picked out in 1994, the pale yellow she'd always wanted. The same window over the sink where she used to watch the birds at the feeder I'd put up for her the first spring we lived here. The recipe card in the drawer. I hadn't lost the house. I was still here. 2 days later, Vivienne's condo across town was empty. The neighbor 2 doors down from the building told someone, who told my neighbor who eventually told me, she was gone before the week was out. No forwarding address. The management company was surprised. I told my son Paul what had happened. It was one of the harder conversations of my adult life. Not because he was unkind, but because he was kind, which is harder. He sat at the same kitchen table where Oliver had sat and listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, he said, Dad, I'm glad you're okay. He said it simply, without drama, which is very Paul. Then he said, Oliver told me he was worried about you. He didn't tell me what he'd found. He just said he was worried. I didn't know that. The image of my 14-year-old grandson carrying that worry alone, researching in his room late at night, deciding whether to say something, deciding how to say it, it got to me more than I expected. I told Paul to tell Oliver I wanted to take him to dinner. Somewhere Oliver chose. He chose a steakhouse. He's 14. Of course he chose a steakhouse. We sat across from each other in a red leather booth and I let him order whatever he wanted, and I told him that what he had done took courage. Real courage. Not the movie kind. The quiet kind, where you're not sure you're right and you're scared of the reaction, and you do it anyway because not doing it feels worse. Oliver chewed his steak and nodded like he was processing this. Then he said with perfect 14-year-old understatement, I figured you'd want to know. I laughed for the first time in a long time. Real laughter, not the polite kind. I see a therapist now. I started 3 months ago. which is something I wouldn't have done at 50 and probably wouldn't have done at 62. There's a specific kind of shame that comes with this kind of thing. The sense that you should have known better, that the clues were there, that a smarter or more guarded man would have seen it sooner. My therapist, who is a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Alcott, does not permit me to spend much time on that particular line of thinking. You were grieving, she said, in our second session. You were lonely. She was skilled. Stop trying to make this about intelligence. I'm working on it. The house is not for sale. I repainted the front door last spring, which I'd been meaning to do since 2021. I put a new feeder up in the backyard because a squirrel had destroyed the old one and I'd never replaced it. I am 63 years old and I live alone, and some nights are harder than others, but I am in my house and it is mine and nothing was taken from me. Oliver comes over on the first Saturday of every month now. This was his idea. He's teaching me how to play chess, a project which is going poorly but which I suspect he enjoys for that reason. He's also discovered that I make good chili, so we've settled into a pattern. Chess in the afternoon, chili in the evening. A movie he picks that I usually fall asleep during. My daughter Meg asks me sometimes if I'll try again. Dating, she means. I tell her honestly that I don't know. I don't say yes to reassure her, and I don't say no to make her worry less. I just don't know. And at 63, I've gotten comfortable enough with uncertainty to leave some things as questions for a while. What I do know is this. I know that the most important message I've received in years came from a 14-year-old boy at midnight, 5 words with no punctuation, who was terrified I wouldn't believe him. I know he did something that many adults I know would not have done. He told the uncomfortable truth to someone he loved, without knowing how that person would receive it, because he understood that not telling it would be a kind of betrayal. I know that I almost signed away 31 years of memories for someone who had a file in 3 different states. I know that I didn't. I know whose kitchen I'm sitting in right now. I know whose handwriting is on that recipe card in the drawer. And I know that this house, which I almost couldn't see clearly because I was so desperate to move forward, has everything in it that matters. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you have someone in your corner who will tell you the hard thing. Someone who will send the photo at midnight and wait up for your reply. Someone who will bring a printed folder and lay the pages out in order and look you in the eye and tell you what they found, even when they're scared of how you'll react. That kind of love doesn't announce itself. It shows up at 11:47 on a Tuesday night with a screenshot and 5 careful words. Pay attention when it does. I've had a lot of time to sit with what almost happened, not in a punishing way. I'm past the part where I replay every conversation and hate myself for not seeing it sooner. But I do think about it. I think about cause and effect, about how certain things, when you trace them back, were always going to lead where they led. Vivienne didn't choose me at random. She chose a man who was grieving, who was lonely, who had equity in a paid-off house and a retirement account he'd spent 30 years building. She chose a man whose instinct was to trust, because that instinct had served him well for 6 decades. She was skilled at reading that kind of man. I understand now that I was never a person to her. I was a calculation, and when I understood that, something shifted in me that I don't think will shift back, but here's what I keep coming back to. The thing that actually saved me wasn't suspicion. I didn't save myself, Oliver did. A 14-year-old boy sitting in his room late at night, doing a school project, stumbling onto something he wasn't looking for, and then having the character to do something about it. That's not luck. That's who he is. You don't accidentally become the kind of person who prints out court records and brings them in a folder and sits across from his grandfather and tells him the truth. That's something built slowly, quietly, over years. It comes from somewhere. I think about integrity the way I think about infrastructure. You don't see it when it's working. It only becomes visible under pressure. Oliver had pressure, the very real fear that I would be angry, that I wouldn't believe him, that he would damage something between us that couldn't be repaired. He told me anyway. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. And I think about what I almost lost. Not just the money, Not just the house, but the house. The one with Lorraine's cabinet color in the kitchen, and her recipe card in the drawer and 31 years of actual life inside it. I was so determined to prove I could move forward that I couldn't see I was being moved. There's a difference. Moving forward is something you choose with clear eyes. Being moved is something that happens to you while you're looking somewhere else. What I want to say to anyone watching this is not be suspicious of everyone. That's not the lesson. The lesson, if I have to call it that, is pay attention to the people who love you enough to risk the conversation. Oliver risked the conversation. He didn't know how it would go. He did it anyway. That kind of courage is quiet and it doesn't announce itself, and you can miss it if you're not paying attention. I didn't miss it. Barely. But I didn't miss it. I'm still in my house. Oliver comes over on the first Saturday of every month. We play chess badly and eat chili, and I fall asleep during whatever movie he picks. It is, without question, one of the best things in my life right now. Whatever you're holding on to tonight, whatever you're almost lost, or whatever you're afraid of losing, I hope you have an Oliver. I hope you have someone willing to send the photo at midnight and wait up for your reply. And if you do, make sure they know you see them.